Berlin is dying. Soviet shells strike every few seconds. Buildings crumble into rubble. Fires rage across each street. The air is thick with smoke and death. Deep below the shattered city, in a concrete bunker, Adolf Hitler prepares to meet his end. Someone must protect him. Someone must hold back the Soviet advance while the Führer takes his final farewells. Someone must oversee the last defense of the Third Reich. That person is Wilhelm Mohnke, SS general and war criminal, who would defend Hitler's bunker until the very last moment and somehow evade justice for the rest of his life. This is his story. A story of loyalty to a madman. A story of unpunished atrocities. A story of a man who should have faced a firing squad, but instead died peacefully in his bed at age 90. How did he manage it? How did one of history's most wanted war criminals live freely for over 50 years? Wilhelm Mohnke was born on March 15, 1911, in the city of Lübeck in northern Germany. He grew up in a middle-class family. His father was a merchant. His childhood was unremarkable. But Mohnke came of age during turbulent times. Germany had lost World War I. The economy lay in ruins. Millions were unemployed. The people yearned for change. Adolf Hitler promised that change. He pledged to restore Germany's greatness. He promised jobs, pride, and revenge against those who humiliated the nation. Mohnke believed him. In 1931, at age 20, he joined the Nazi Party. 2 years later, he enlisted in the SS. He was an early believer, a true fanatic, ready to follow Hitler anywhere. He joined the Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler, the elite personal bodyguard unit. Only the most loyal, dedicated, fanatical Nazis were accepted. Mohnke fit perfectly. Tall, blonde, athletic, he embodied the Aryan ideal. Most importantly, he was utterly devoted to Hitler and the Nazi cause. When World War II began in September 1939, Mohnke was ready to prove his loyalty in ways that would haunt history. The Leibstandarte fought in Poland, France, Greece, and Yugoslavia. Everywhere they went, they won victories. Everywhere they went, atrocities followed. The event that would define Mohnke's legacy occurred in May 1940 during the invasion of France. British forces were retreating toward Dunkirk to escape across the English Channel near a small village called Wormhout. About 80 British soldiers surrendered to Mohnke's unit. What happened next was a war crime. Prisoners were herded into a barn packed like animals. SS soldiers hurled grenades through the windows. Explosions tore through the crowded barn. Men screamed as bodies were torn apart. Survivors of the blasts were shot. At least 80 British prisoners died, some estimates higher. This became known as the Wormhout Massacre. Witnesses said Wilhelm Mohnke gave the order. He commanded the unit and bore responsibility. Mohnke denied it for life. He claimed he was absent and unaware. The truth perished with those men in the barn. The war continued. Mohnke was wounded multiple times. He lost a foot to a landmine in Yugoslavia, but kept fighting, rising through the ranks. By 1944, he was an SS colonel, one of the senior officers in the Waffen-SS. He commanded troops on the Western Front during the Allied invasion of Normandy. There, another massacre occurred. On June 7, 1944, one day after D-Day, Canadian prisoners of war were captured near the village of A. They were young men, some barely out of their teens who had come to liberate Europe. They never survived. SS soldiers from the 12th SS Panzer Division murdered at least 20 Canadian prisoners that day, shooting them in the back of the head and leaving their bodies in the fields. Over the following days, more than 150 Canadian prisoners were killed. It was systematic, deliberate, and policy-driven. Mohnke held command authority in the area, responsible whether he directly ordered the killings or allowed them to happen. After the war, Canadian investigators desperately sought to prosecute him. They had witness testimony, evidence, and lists of names. Mohnke's name ranked high, yet he was never caught. By April 1945, the war was undeniably lost. Everyone knew it, perhaps everyone except Hitler, who clung to impossible hopes for miracle victories. The Soviet army closed in on Berlin. Millions of soldiers encircled the city. The end was days away. On April 23, 1945, Hitler gave Wilhelm Mohnke his final command: defend the government district of Berlin, defend the Reich Chancellery, defend the Führer bunker. Mohnke commanded about 2,000 men. Waffen-SS soldiers, Hitler Youth, elderly fighters from the folk militia, boys and grandfathers, all facing the largest army in the world. It was hopeless. Everyone knew it. Yet Mohnke obeyed. He organized his troops into battle groups, placing men in ruined buildings. He set up machine gun nests and anti-tank positions. He prepared to fight to the death. Above ground, Berlin was being destroyed block by block. Soviet artillery hammered the city without mercy. Soviet infantry advanced through the rubble, contesting every street, every building, every room. Below ground, in the bunker, Hitler was unraveling. He lashed out at his generals, accusing all of betrayal. He moved imaginary armies on maps while real soldiers died above. He was a broken man in a fantasy world as his empire collapsed. Mohnke visited the bunker regularly to report on conditions. He witnessed Hitler in those final days, the trembling hands, pale skin, lifeless eyes. Still, he continued to fight, sending men to die for a lost cause. On April 28, 1945, Hitler married Eva Braun in the bunker. It was a strange ceremony, a wedding in a tomb. Champagne was poured while shells exploded above. Mohnke attended the small reception afterward, standing in the cramped underground room with the remaining Nazi leadership, celebrating a marriage that would last less than 2 days. Hitler pulled Mohnke aside, requesting a situation report. How long could they hold? Mohnke told the truth. The Soviets were less than a mile away. They would reach the bunker within 24 to 48 hours. There was no hope of relief, no escape. Hitler listened and then made his choice. He would kill himself rather than be captured. On April 30th, 1945, the end arrived. In the afternoon, Hitler and Eva Braun retired to their private room. Eva bit a cyanide capsule. Hitler placed a pistol to his head and pulled the trigger. Their bodies were carried to the garden and burned with gasoline. The Führer was dead. The Third Reich was finished. Mohnke survived, and he had no plans to die in that bunker. That night, Mohnke organized a breakout. About 500 people, soldiers, secretaries, nurses, officials, attempted to escape through Soviet lines. They moved through subway tunnels and ruined buildings, aiming to reach German forces to the west. It was a desperate gamble. Soviet soldiers were everywhere. The city was a maze of fire and death. Mohnke led one of the groups personally. They crept through darkness, climbing over rubble, crawling through sewers, listening for patrols. By morning, they had traveled several miles, but exhaustion set in. Soviet forces closed in. Mohnke realized escape was impossible. On May 2, 1945, Wilhelm Mohnke surrendered to the Soviet army. The man who had defended Hitler's bunker to the end was now a prisoner. What followed was unexpected. Normally, a senior SS general would face trial. The Soviets might have handed him to the British or Canadians seeking justice for war crimes, but none of that occurred. Mohnke was taken to Moscow, interrogated by Soviet intelligence. He spent 10 years in Soviet prison camps, but was never tried. The Soviets prioritized intelligence over justice. Mohnke had been in the bunker during Hitler's final days. He knew secrets, had witnessed events, and the Soviets wanted full details about Hitler's death, the bunker, and Nazi leadership. Mohnke provided information, and in return remained a prisoner rather than being executed. Meanwhile, the British and Canadians pursued him, filing requests and demanding extradition. They had evidence of war crimes at Wormhout and in Normandy. The Soviets refused. Mohnke was their prisoner, and they would not hand him over. The Cold War had begun. Alliances between East and West were dissolving, and cooperation on war criminals became impossible. Mohnke remained in Soviet camps, shielded from Western justice by the Iron Curtain. In 1955, 10 years after the war ended, Wilhelm Mohnke was released. He returned to West Germany, walking off a train a free man. No charges, no trial, no punishment. The British and Canadians still sought him. West Germany faced a new challenge. Its laws on war crimes made prosecution extremely difficult. Witnesses had died, evidence was lost, memories faded. The legal system required proof beyond reasonable doubt, and after 10 years, that proof was scarce. Investigators tried regardless. In 1988, German prosecutors reopened the investigation into the Wormhout massacre. They interviewed Mohnke and collected what evidence remained. But by 1993, the investigation was closed. Insufficient evidence, they said. The case could not be proven in court. Wilhelm Mohnke would never face trial. What kind of life did he live after the war? A comfortable one. He settled in Hamburg, working as a salesman for a truck company. He married and led a normal, quiet, middle-class life. He never showed remorse. He never admitted guilt. When journalists asked about Wormhout, he denied everything. When historians investigated, he refused to cooperate. Mohnke lived freely in Germany for almost 50 years after leaving Soviet captivity. Think about that. The man who likely ordered the killing of 80 British prisoners. The man who commanded troops that murdered more than 100 Canadian prisoners. The man who defended Hitler's bunker to the very end. He lived a peaceful retirement in Hamburg. He went to restaurants, walked in parks, celebrated birthdays and holidays, and grew old surrounded by family. His victims never aged. They remained forever young, dead in a barn in France, dead in fields in Normandy. Their lives stolen by men who faced no punishment. Wilhelm Mohnke died on August 6, 2001, at the age of 90. He passed away peacefully in a hospital bed, surrounded by family. No trial, no prison, no justice. Survivors of Wormhout and their families had waited more than 60 years. Canadian families had waited over 60 years. They never got their day in court. When Mohnke died, a British survivor said, "I always hoped I would see him face justice. Now I know it will never happen." He got away with murder, and he did. How did Wilhelm Mohnke escape justice? It was a perfect storm of circumstances. First, the Soviets captured him instead of the Western Allies. They kept him locked away for 10 years, while evidence faded and witnesses died. Second, the Cold War blocked cooperation. The British and Canadians could not retrieve him from the Soviets. By the time he was released, prosecution had become much harder. Third, the German legal system made it difficult to try old cases. The standard of proof was high. Time worked in favor of the accused. Fourth, Mohnke was shrewd. He never admitted anything. He never confessed. He always had an excuse, a denial, or someone else to blame. Fifth, and perhaps most importantly, the world moved on. People wanted to forget the war, rebuild, and look forward. War criminals like Mohnke benefited from this exhaustion. Justice requires energy. Justice requires memory. When people grow tired of remembering, the guilty go free. What should we think about Wilhelm Mohnke? He was a true believer. He joined the Nazis early and stayed loyal until the very end. While others fled or surrendered, he kept fighting. He defended Hitler's bunker until nothing remained to defend. Was that courage or fanaticism? He was almost certainly a war criminal. Evidence at Wormhout and Normandy points to his responsibility. Survivors identified him. Investigators concluded he gave orders. But he was never convicted. Does that make him innocent, or merely lucky? He lived a long life, 90 years, longer than most. Decades of peace and comfort, while his victims had nothing. Fair? No, but history is not about fairness. History is about what happened. And what happened is this. A man who likely murdered prisoners in 1940, commanded troops that massacred young Canadians in 1944, and defended Hitler to the final moment, lived peacefully until 2001. He beat the system. He escaped justice. He won. The last defenders of Hitler's bunker scattered after the war. Some were captured, some killed. Some escaped and were never found. Wilhelm Mohnke was captured but never punished. He returned to Germany and lived as if nothing had happened. He never apologized. He never admitted guilt. He never faced his victims or their families. When he died, the last chance for justice died with him. Today, when historians write about the final days of the Third Reich, Wilhelm Mohnke is a footnote. The SS general who held the bunker, the man who organized the final breakout, the survivor. But to the families of the men murdered at Wormhout, to the families of the Canadians killed in Normandy, he is something else entirely. He is the one who got away. Proof that sometimes evil wins. A reminder that justice is not guaranteed and that war criminals can live long, comfortable lives. That the worst people sometimes escape the consequences of their actions. That is the legacy of Wilhelm Mohnke. Not courage, not loyalty, not military skill. Just a man who did terrible things and never paid the price. Please leave your thoughts about this content in the comments below. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.